Let's take a.
I'm back.
Hi, Gil. You were jammed.
No, I think memories of the racism of 1958 was just too upsetting, and it hurt my computer.
Okay. Sarah, I think you should kick off.
Okay, are we ready to start? All right, well, first to invite everyone. All right, have you opened the waiting room to everyone? Shlomo?
I'm sorry?
Are there any live attendees that we need to open the waiting room for, or just
I don't know.
recording?
I'm not aware. Are there people in the waiting room still? We'll just start.
Okay. Well, I want to first invite and welcome everyone to this webinar today on evangelical support for Israel. We have an illustrious panel of speakers who will be discussing the findings of the report by Dr. Shlomo Fisher and Dr. Dov Maimon. But first, I want to start with some introductory words from Professor Yedidia Stern, who is the president of the Jewish People Policy Institute and a full professor in the Faculty of Law at Bar-Ilan University. He was educated both in Israel at Bar-Ilan University and holds a doctorate in corporate law from Harvard University in the United States. Prior to joining JPPI, he was also a senior fellow at the Israel Democracy Institute and its prize president for research. Amongst his many, many, many publications and prizes, I just want to point to his award of the Zeltner Prize for Excellence in Legal Research and the Gordy Prize for Outstanding Activity in Public Law. And amongst many other topics, I am sure he will have some inspiring opening words for us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you to Shlomo and Dov for writing this amazing publication that we will be exposed to in a minute. Well, the current war is motivated by religious beliefs. The Hamas, one version of Islam, and Hezbollah and Iran with another version of Islam want to destroy Israel in the name of religion. But religion is also an engine for love of Israel. And the group that stands out in the love of Israel on a religious basis are the evangelicals, tens of millions of people in North America and many more around the globe. And they play an important role in increasing the United States support for Israel. The support is based on the religious belief, as I just said, and also on conservative political view. And we'll hear about this in a minute. As I recall, Ron Dermer, who was Israel's ambassador to the United States, said in a public interview here in Israel that we Israelis need to understand that the evangelical Christians are the backbone of the United States support for Israel. And we have to ask ourselves, is this support stable and secure? So Dr. Shlomo Fisher and Dr. Dov Maimon, both senior fellows here at JPPI, prepared this study. And in the study, they present also the cultural and the religious basis for this support, both from a historical point of view as well as contemporary analysis. And they examine the dialectical relationship between the evangelicals and the Jews. They pose two challenges facing this relationship. One has to do with a very clear and strong identification of the evangelicals with the Republican Party when Israel wants to preserve its bipartisan support. And the second challenge is the conceptual change, especially in the young generation of evangelicals who do not automatically support Israel and partially join in criticizing it. So the research we are discussing today offers different ways to deal with these challenges. And I want to conclude by again thanking Shlomo and Dov for conducting this important study and they will present it to us. And what is important for us, being what we are, is not only to understand the phenomenon, but to change reality, meaning to listen to the findings, to understand what might be the policy outcome of it, and how can we intervene in securing this very, very special relationship between our friends in North America and the State of Israel. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. The floor is yours.
Before Professor Fisher and Dr. Maimon present the findings of our research, I just want to briefly present both of them to our audience. First is Professor Shlomo Fisher, who is a senior fellow here at JPPI and also teaches sociology at the School of Education at the Hebrew University, as well as at the Ben Gurion University of the Negev. His research interests include the nexus of religion, politics, and class in Israel, contemporary religion, and the sociology of the Jewish people. He has published widely in this field, as well as in study of education over the past 25 years. He is also a graduate of the Mandel School for Educational Research in Jerusalem. Our second author, senior fellow Dov Maimon, leads the Grand Strategy Toward Islam project and the Israel Diaspora New Paradigm project here at JPPI. Amongst his action-oriented work, he is a member of the Advisory Council for Improving Access to Ultra-Orthodox in Higher Education, and he is also the author of the Action Plan for Bringing Mass Migration of French Jews to Israel. He himself, of course, is French, was educated in France and at the Technion, and holds an MBA as well as an MA in religious anthropology and a PhD in Islamic and medieval studies from the Sorbonne.
We're frozen though.
Your career ends with the Sorbonne, Dov.
Yeah, I will continue about my biography if you want. Just to looking for Sarah. No, so Sarah is a very brilliant person, and she will come back to us very soon. Anyway, you know, we are already with God presence anyway. Anything is just by hazard, as you know. We are really, God is everywhere, and we are really taking charge of a meeting. But we have to build a relationship with evangelical Christians. They are very important person. We are looking. I will just start now what I wanted to say later on. So I'm looking for Sarah. But I think just to tell you that we are fighting on 7 battlefronts today in Israel, and we have an 8th one. The 8th one is the media fight, and the media fight we need new partners. We have very good partner, people who love the Jewish people, love Israel, and want to be part of the Bible, part of God way we want to achieve in the world, and they are part of it. They are the Protestant, evangelical Protestants, so, and they are very important. And what we want to achieve, like Yedidia said before, we have 2 big challenges. One is there is a new blessing with new people coming to evangelical, not only white people, but also black people, Latino people, a lot of people in South America, people in Africa. So it's a big blessing for us, and we have to take opportunity of that, and we have to think about it. These people have a lot of understanding of suffering. These people have a lot of understanding for Palestinian suffering too. So we have to maybe think a new strategy with people. The second big challenge, but is regarding the demographic shift, that we have a young generation, like the young Jews in America, who are very connected to the wokeism, with the liberal thinking that they get at university. So we have also to take care of. It's not anymore thing that is gain for us, the support of evangelical. We have to invest in that. We have to think like we do for the Jews in America, to think a lot of effort, and we have to think how the Jewish people can reach out to evangelical, help them embrace them, and we are afraid of them. So I'm going to talk about why 3 reasons we're afraid of evangelical, and we didn't do nothing up to now. But let's go. I think Shlomo, you have to take the lead now.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
if you can share the presentation,
I'm gonna put the PowerPoint on. Hopefully, share. Okay, so this worked. Okay, thank you. All right. So I'll start where Dov left off, which was the summary and recommendations, and that is that steadfast evangelical support for Israel is more unstable than is commonly supposed. Right? We're a think tank, and we're a think tank that's policy oriented. So we're going to start off first of all with the summary and with the recommendations. And as Dov indicated, is being challenged by overlapping demographic and theological factors. Our recommendation is, and I want to get this off at the beginning, is specifically that the Israeli government and its American supporters cannot take evangelical support for granted. The Israeli government must invest in the evangelicals as a whole, and especially in evangelical youth and evangelicals of color. In other words, okay, so that's really what we came to say. We came to say that a lot of people think that evangelical support is a rock of ages. Well, folks, it may not be, and we need to be proactive and preempt that and invest in this. So, as a matter of fact, you mentioned this, and Ron Dermer's remarks at the Makor Rishon conference in 2021, Ambassador Ron Dermer, really served as our point of departure and as a foil for our research. I'm going to quote Dermer's remarks in full. People have to understand that the background of Israel's support in the United States is the evangelical Christians. It's true because of numbers and because of their passionate and unequivocal support for Israel. I'm not going to analyze this very short statement fully, but it rests upon a notion that evangelical support for Israel is based upon a sort of dogmatic, rather esoteric theology called, in many quarters, premillenarial dispensationalism, and that there's which lays out a sort of scenario for the end time in which the Jews in their return to Israel, the land of Israel, play a major role. Well, it turns out that even though this theology does make great movies and video games, many, or I would say most evangelicals, as we understand it, do not really fully subscribe to this sort of script that this theology lays out, but rather it's based upon very broad pro-Zionist sentiment that's very much connected to American history and American identity. And it goes back to the early years of the Republic, and it goes back to the 18th century and maybe possibly even earlier. And to put it very much in a nutshell, Israel serves as a sort of a metaphor or a stand-in for America. That phrase on top of the title, Our American Israel, is from a minister, Abiel Abbott, in 1799 in the New England area. And that sort of captures in a nutshell the type of commitment that American civilization has to Zionism. This has nothing to do with Jews. I mean, this has to do with the fact, or not very much to do with Jews, I put it that way, and that since America and Israel here refers to both biblical Israel, refers to the Jewish people, and refers to the state of Israel. All these meanings are conflated in the term Israel, and as I said, it serves as a metaphor insofar as as America and the American people think of themselves as being charismatic and being a chosen people with a divine mission. That mission is to, bring democracy and enlightenment to the world. And if you want to know how does a divine, a chosen people such as the United States, such as the American people, have to proceed, well, there's a blueprint. And that blueprint is called the Hebrew Bible. That blueprint is called the Bible, including both the Old and the New Testaments. So, and this representation of Israel as a sort of stand-in or metaphor for America is very much connected to a verse that is very important to many, many evangelicals, which is the verse in Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you. So you have here, so and as I learned today from David earlier on today, that the first president to express, and he'll elaborate about this, Zionist sentiment was John Quincy Adams. And that in the book, we talked about it in the context of what's called Jacksonian populism, Jacksonian democracy, not necessarily connected to Andrew Jackson, but to this idea that the American people have a charismatic status, reflect the divine will in a certain sense. And that is sort of paralleled. America and Israel are sort of parallel countries, and hence it's only befitting that they should support Israel. And in fact, the major Zionist document that was produced in America in 1891, 6 years before Herzl, and called for the establishment of a Jewish state in the Middle East in the framework of the Ottoman Empire. It's called the Blackstone Memorial. But, and here I'm going to, the downside of that is that if America and Israel have this metaphorical or this equivalent relationship, then if the identity of character of America changes in a negative direction, right? For example, as is happening on many university campuses, if America is regarded first and foremost as an illegitimate settler colonialist enterprise, then, as it were, a fortiori, kal v'chomer, as we say, then for sure, then the identity of character of Israel will be regarded in very negative light as a settler colonial society. The difference being is that you really can't eradicate America, but you can think about and imagine eradicating Israel. So, so like I said, whereas statements like that of Ambassador Dermer rested upon the fact that people have theological commitments, and theological commitments are more, how shall I say, steadfast and solid than regular commitments. Well, that's a little bit of a myth. It's not really a theological commitment. It's rather a broad civilizational, cultural commitment having to do with American history, having to do with American identity, and how Americans think of themselves. They think of themselves in large part through Israel, and hence that support is more malleable than is commonly supposed. So, given this background, what are the demographic changes? What are the ideological changes? I'm now going to go back to Dov and have Dov present the rest of the PowerPoint that we prepared. Thank you, Dov.
Thank you, Shlomo, and welcome back to Sarah. Shlomo, could you go on to the next slide so I can?
Yes, here we go.
I will tell you then. Listen, if we see that evangelicals are so good a resource and the asset for the Jewish people, why we don't reach out to them? Why we don't take out? How we cannot contact them and join them for all that? So we have a lot of questions. A lot will be to Rabbi Steve Vernick. What the liberal Jews in America don't reach out to evangelicals, and there are probably good reason for that. And we have to, if we identify the diagnostic, what is wrong or what is not working now, maybe we can find out together some answers or some ways to intervene in a correct and effective way. So I want to show you, like you see in the slide, in the screen now, a lot of evangelical, but not all, believe that God gave the land to Israel, to Jews, and they like the Jewish people. And what is very important is the third line here. They want the full land of Israel to be owned by Israel. They want even Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, to own control of that. So that means they, in some part, very close to the right agenda in Israel. So it's not exactly bipartisan issue in Israel. The left and the liberal Jews in America would like even that the American the American power, the American government administration will pressure Israel to accept the two-state solution. And these people, for all the left and all the liberal, many of the liberals, they see the evangelical as a barrier, as a something which is against their own agenda. They believe that the only way to go to a two-state, to have a Palestinian state, is to pressure the state, the government of Israel. So when they see the evangelical, they cannot that. This is on the left side. But there is also people in the right side of the political map in Israel. They don't like so much evangelical. And I'm part, as a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, I can tell you that a lot of people are afraid of Christian. For 2,000 years, we have a good history, long history with Christian. They want to convert us. So we don't exactly understand what their eschatological view of evangelical. We know that at some point, according to Parousia and so on, maybe they will want us to convert, or maybe they want us to die, or something that will happen. This is the second thing. From my own experience, with 2 years of study, and with meeting with people like David Persson and many, many other people all over the world, I think it's wrong. These people love Israel. Only 12% of the evangelical love Israel and the state of Israel and the Jewish people because of eschatological views. What they want is just they want to be part of a big story, of a biblical story. They want to be part of the story of God love, want God want the state of Israel to be back, and to the Jews to be a light for all the nation, and so on. So I think it's wrong, but we have to overcome this barrier, and we have to think. And the third reason I have identified, I think that is a problem, is because some people in Israel are afraid. They're evangelical. I'm just telling you what the people say, not what I believe personally. So Reverend Akaya and Reverend David Persson, please don't take it personally. What the people say in Israel, and they believe that some people, evangelical, want to have here a Gog and Magog world war. You know, they want to make it big explosion. They want to add Magdenon story here. They want to have a big war with Iran and clash of civilization. And people are very afraid of these people. They can pressure us to somewhere we are very afraid to go. And we want to appeasement, and they want to go for some fight. So this is the free reason. And I just make it because it's the diagnostic, and then we have to work now for that. So listen, I'm just showing 2 slides now, very short slides. We have a change in demographic shift. If you look at the evangelical Protestant white evangelical, this is from 23% to 14.5.
Yeah, let me just say that the white evangelicals over 50 are like the stereotypical evangelical support for Israel, right? When people think of the evangelical support, they think of white evangelicals over 50, largely in rural areas in the West and in the South. So that demographic is what is declining. Okay, thanks. Excuse me, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Shlomo said, and we see the disaffiliated, like with young Jews, you know, Rabbi Steve Vernick. It's like also the unaffiliated. Among the Jews, the young generation is disaffiliated from religion. So it's working, as you see it on the graph, it's the same story. We share the same story with evangelical, and we have to take it, we have to make an effort to keep the Jews, and maybe to take evangelicals, and to support of Israel, which is not given. And the last slide I want, so here you can see that 30% of the evangelical in America today are not white. It's 22% black, maybe, and 10%, 8 to 10% Latinos, and probably Asiatic and other people. So it's changing in some way, and these people don't share the same, let's say, commitment to Israel, because they also share the suffering and the many things with the suffering, and they are from migration. They have a lot of experience with all that, and they want to be part of the story. When they think of Israel, they also think about the suffering of the Palestinian, and they want to do something about it, to be activist in this way. So, and the last slide, please, Shlomo. And this is something that I just show you because it's a study of Moti Hinbari, and we have seen something very strange, that we see the very strong support is among the young people. The young people are not anymore supportive of Israel in an unconditional way. This is all what I want to say. We have a lot more written in the book, in the report, so we invite you to refer, and we want especially to welcome and to listen to you. Please, Sarah, continue. Take it on, take out the slideshow, and we continue to hear you.
Get rid of this.
Thank you so much.
Stop share. Okay.
All right, thank you so much, and apologies for technical difficulties. I'm actually traveling today. I'm in a hotel in New York City, and apparently our internet connection is a bit unstable, but I will try and soldier on here. I want to go ahead and introduce our panel, and then we will dive into some deeper questions about the study, which I also had an opportunity to read and found to be a fascinating new look at some changing patterns of thought and activism that I hope our speakers will be able to address. But first, I want to introduce our panel today. We have 4 speakers. The first is Reverend Akaya Kitchen, an ordained Assembly of God evangelist who has over 15 years of pro-Israel advocacy experience, including as the founder and president of Lifting Up Zion. She is currently based in Little Rock, Arkansas, where she is a doctoral student at the King's University and adjunct professor of communications at Grace Christian University and at the University of Arkansas. Our second speaker will be Reverend David Parsons, who is well known to many of us in Israel as the Senior Vice President and spokesperson for the International Christian Embassy here in Jerusalem for the past 23 years. We will also be joined by our senior fellow here at JPPI, Gil Troy, who is a professor and an American presidential historian. Amongst his many writings, his latest book, To Resist the Academic Intifada, Letters to My Students on Defending the Zionist Dream, was just published recently. And last, of course, but not least, Rabbi Stephen Wernick, who is the senior rabbi of Beth Tzedek Congregation and currently serves in leadership role of many other communal organizations focused on diaspora-Israel relations and the network of conservative Jewish congregations in North America. He has also been named as one of Newsweek's 50 most influential rabbis in America, and we will turn to him in a few moments. But first, I want to start with Reverend Kitchen. We just heard from Dov and Shlomo about the changing demographic profile of evangelical support for Israel, including the diminishment of white evangelical support and the growing factions of Black and Latino support for Israel. I was hoping you could speak both from your personal background and also experience in pro-Israel advocacy about the increasing percentage of Black and Latino evangelicals and their relationship to Israel.
Yes, this was such an exciting report to read. I just want to thank the JPPI for inviting me to be a part of this panel and for this excellent study. I highlighted and underlined a lot as I read through it. And so I am an evangelical from the Bible Belt, Southern United States, African-American woman, and I've actually also been involved in Latino churches. And so this was a particularly exciting study. In my particular brand of evangelicalism, which is Pentecostalism, has traditionally been one of the streams of evangelicalism that's been most pro-Israel. And a PhD dissertation that might be of interest, it was written by Dr. Ray Gannon from Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 2003, charts the historical trends of kind of the ebb and flow of the Pentecostal support of Israel over the centuries. And so this sort of concern, it's not necessarily a new thing. With the war in Gaza that's going on in American political environment, it's definitely of utmost concern at the moment. And so, but it is something that has sort of ebbed and flowed. One of the things that I think that the report does really well is it really demonstrates this conflation of religion and politics. It's a very icky thing, and it's really hard to kind of separate the two. I don't know if it's quite possible. But one thing that's very encouraging is that in my sort of neck of the woods in southern USA is support for Israel seems to be still quite bipartisan among evangelicals in this part of the country. And so that is something that is encouraging. I do think it's definitely fair to see that there is probably an increase of minority evangelicals who are supportive of Israel, but at the same time, I think it's also fair to acknowledge that a lot of the more liberal evangelical streams of Black and Latinos are not as pro-Israel at this time. And then another thing that the report does really well is it kind of demonstrates this interesting interwovenness of support for Israel and eschatology. And so that's one of those things. I'm part of the Assemblies of God. It is a premillennial Pentecostal movement, amillennialism or amillennialism, depending on how you want to say that, is not something that is compatible with Assemblies of God. And so it's one of the more pro-Israel denominations in the United States, which is actually quite interesting. So I think that acknowledgement of the sort of conflation of eschatology and pro-Israel attitudes is actually quite fair. I will say this. So JPPI, your recommendations were absolutely stunning. I really liked reading through those, but reading as an evangelical, I thought, well, there are recommendations here that I think could be drawn out for evangelicals to put into use as well. It's such a valuable report. And so as I read this, I thought, well, not only is it important for Israel to kind of take advantage of a multifaceted approach to the biblical Israel metaphor, which I think is quite valuable. I think that evangelicals should take a look at this report and note that there is a trend, not just of decreasing support of Israel, but decreasing church attendance, decreasing Bible reading, just an overall decrease in religious commitment. And so as evangelicals can take a look at that, I think it's really important that as an evangelical, I take this and I say, okay, what can I do to help emphasize the eternal nature of a covenantal God and a covenantal religion, which Christians inherited from the Jewish people.
I was wondering if I could ask you a follow-up question. Speaking as an African-American woman and one who has been involved in pro-Israel advocacy as well as in the church for many, many years now, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how you see the African-American community in particular, and whether you feel they would be able to serve as a bridge between Israel and a more liberal, progressive community in the United States.
That's an interesting question. I will say that my personal circle is not that liberal group. And so I don't know that it's necessarily in my wheelhouse to speak with certainty on that. I will say that I'm an optimist and I'm always open to looking for places to build bridges, however.
I appreciate the spirit of optimism, and we hope that your leadership will be will play a very important role in building these bridges going forward. If I could turn now to Reverend Parsons, we've heard quite a bit here now about some of the changes not only in religious practice and culture amongst young evangelicals, which have as much to do with domestic considerations and their own faith-based tradition as much as to Israel. But I was wondering if you could comment a bit about how you see the changing relationship of young evangelicals to Israel, and particularly what can you or we do about it?
Thank you, Dr. Hirschhorn. First, let me say I've been here in Israel almost 30 years working with the Christian Embassy, but before that, I spent 4 years in Washington lobbying for Israel, a small sort of Christian sister of AIPAC called CPAC. And by my 4th year there, I'd learned the ropes and helped spearhead the bill to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. In 1995, it got passed into law. By the time it got through the sausage grinder of Congress, it wasn't exactly what we wrote. 22 years later, who would have thunk it? Donald Trump is the one who implements this based on the fact that Congress had already expressed overwhelming support for this 22 years earlier, and he actually did it in the order that we had originally written in our draft proposal for Senator John Kyle. And the way we got that passed, it was a small sort of Gideon's army of Christians and Jews advocating together in the middle of Oslo that Israel had already taken enough risk for peace. And with the 3,000th year-old anniversary of Jerusalem coming up, the Jewish connection to Jerusalem, it was time to, end this wrong. And so I've seen the success of even just small groups of Jews and Christians coming together to move mountains. We're talking about Jerusalem here. And I've learned to really appreciate the partnership whenever we get together to help Israel. I think back then, both parties, if we talk about trends, of course, the Republican Party had its small share of Pat Buchanan's and Bob Novak's over on the far right or whatever, and then, you know, in the Democratic Party, there's a serious problem we have to acknowledge over on the Democratic side of this important bipartisan partnership for Israel that Israel needs to maintain in American politics. On the right side now, among evangelicals, it is true that there are young evangelicals that aren't, I think the biggest problem is that they're not as sold out to the dispensational prophecy chart, which has the church being raptured before the tribulation, and then 2/3 of the Jews going through a sort of convert or die scenario. We think this is a cruel theology. It's repulsive to us. And I'd say, even though people might buy the books that talk about it or listen to some of the teachers, they're not sold out on it. And especially the younger evangelicals, they just haven't bought into it like some of the older generation as it got popular. I grew up in the Bible Belt in North Carolina. I read Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. I think you'll cite it in the report when we were young. But, you know, you come here to Israel and you look around and you say, well, Lord, which 2 Jews have to die so that one finally gets saved? I can't do that, and I can't believe that. And there's too much good, positive reasons to support Israel, the Jewish people, all that we've received from them. But I do think that these young evangelicals, they say that you know, a conservative is a liberal who got mugged. That somehow in the experiences of life, you know, at some point you sort of dial it back some. And I do think a lot of these young evangelicals will come home in respect of supporting Israel as they mature and grow up and have families, and they'll come to the right reasons for supporting Israel. I think it's way too early to identify the trend exactly yet, but I actually think the way Israel has prosecuted this war, we've all gone into it worried about you know, the accusations that Israel's committing genocide and whatever. I think the younger evangelical Christians aren't buying into it. I do think there's a backlash in America and on campuses and all to some of that more radical progressive agenda, which bashes Israel, draws people into it. All the, you know, different cries for social justice for the Palestinians and whatever. But I think the way Israel has prosecuted this war in a moral way, people are young people know how to get different information. They're not relying, thank God, on ABC News or CBS or NBC or MSNBC especially. They have other news sources, and I think you know, I take my son for an example. I said this in the Hebrew version of our session this morning, that you know, he's impressed by Elon Musk and being able to a private initiative, being able to shoot off a rocket and bring that rocket fuselage back and land on the very launching pad that sent it up, without NASA, without government, without whatever. And that Israel has mesmerized the world with the whole spellbinding pager operation and the incredible accurate intelligence, and really prosecuted a just war in a moral way, that I actually think young people, just like things in the past, the birth of Israel in 48, which helped produce a whole generation of pro-Israel Christians, the Israel's victory in 1967, which produced a whole new generation of pro-Israel Christians. I'm optimistic that out of this, if Israel continues to do the right thing, get victory, show compassion to the Arab peoples, show that initiative to try and secure a more stable region through the Abraham Accords, whatever, if we can get back to that track, I think you're not going to lose as many of these white evangelicals as they grow up and mature. And as far as reaching out to the Black and the Latino populations, the Latinos are the fastest growing. I think they've surpassed the American African American community in number, but they're both so important and reachable, large segments by Israel. People like Dusami, help me, Akaya, with his name, Dusami Washington. And as I said this morning, don't ignore the rest of the world, that there's actually 700 million evangelicals. Most are Pentecostal charismatic, like Reverend Kitchen and I, that you have Kenneth Meshu, for example, in South Africa. He's a prominent member of the parliament there, has his own Christian party. We just gave an award to the Chief Justice of South Africa, Mogoeng, for his stand with Israel. You've got a justice on the International Court of Justice who just filed a powerful dissenting opinion in the advisory opinion ruling at the World Court in The Hague. There's allies and people out there. There's a young guy in Canada who's coming up, challenging Trudeau, who you thought you might never see another Stephen Harper, who was evangelical and totally solid on Israel. But there's other sources of support out there that we need to be aware of.
Great.
Well, I appreciate your optimistic vision here, and I'm grateful for a bit of energy in considering the findings of this report. Can I ask you if you feel as optimistic about the relationship between evangelicals in Israel and the Israeli government or Israeli society, being based here in Jerusalem for the past almost 25 years and being a leader of the community here? How do you see, relations within Israel?
Yeah. Look, we've experienced some harassment. I wouldn't call it persecution. When I think of some of the Christian minorities just 50, 100 miles from Israel's borders out around us, they are suffering real persecution. There has been some harassment against Christians here, especially some of the historic churches, but we also tasted it at 2 evangelical events last summer here in Israel. But once the war started, those sort of things just pale in comparison to the need to secure Israel and its future. And we're willing to, ourselves suffer through a few of those things because of all the horrible things done to the Jewish people in the past. It's not to excuse those who are spitting on Christians and all. I do think I would single out President Isaac Herzog in particular for really standing up against it and condemning it, and even going all the way up to Haifa with the chief of police and standing out front of a monastery there that some particular Jewish religious sect was trying to take it over, bully their way in. But given the bad history and all, we have to have a little thick skin and look at the higher priorities here. And it's not going to deter us in standing with Israel.
Thank you for this. I appreciate our remarks from both Reverend Kitchen as well as Reverend Parsons about the present and future of evangelicals in Israel. But I'd like to zoom out and look a little bit about the past and bring in our resident historian, Professor Gil Troy, to speak a little bit about the roots of American Christian Zionism in the United States, and particularly some of the framings illustrated in the report about the Jacksonian influence that we've spoken about here, as well as various theological trends. Gil, can I turn it over to you?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Dov and Shlomo, for very important framing, and to the JPPI for hosting this, and to our fellow panelists. I usually start my conversations with evangelicals with two words in Hebrew: toda v'slicha. Thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your commitment. But most important, this gets to the core of the question, Sarah. Thank you for being a part of an extraordinary story, which is a biblical story, but it's also a story of shared values between the Jewish people, Israel, the American people, and the United States of America, both the formal political entities and the people themselves. And the more we emphasize that, the more we see the integration of that, both historically, which I'll get to in a second, and going forward, the better off we are. Because in many ways, the fight for Israel, we've seen it again and again, is a fight for Western civilization and a fight for the American soul. And our enemies make it very clear. They burn Israeli flags and they burn American flags simultaneously. They curse Israel and they curse America simultaneously. And they assault fundamental ideas like American exceptionalism as much as they assault Zionism itself. So I start with the thank you, but I also start with the sorry. Not only Reverend Parson, because no one should ever, in the Holy Land, in the United States of America, anywhere, ever feel harassed for expressing their religion. And part of the whole idea of Zionism was to create a place not just that was safe for Jews, but to safe for people of all religions. And so it hurts me as an Israeli that you would experience that. But I also, frankly, because we should be more, be a little bit more straightforward. My sorry is usually about the fact that most American Jews don't have the ability to say thank you for your support of Israel, even if I disagree with you on A, B, C, D, including a week before the Trump-Harris election. Sophisticated politics means being able to ally on some things and disagree on other things. And so my sorry is usually about a trend among too many, not all, of course, American Jews, who simply can't say thank you for this extraordinary support. Most important, again, this friendship and this values resonance. Now, there are two ways I could frame today's question to me historically. One is, what do I think about injecting the notion of Jacksonianism as a key piece of the puzzle in understanding religious Zionism, Christian Zionism, and more broadly, how would I explain the phenomenon of Christian Zionism? So I'll start with the first one because it's easier. And the second one, I was given 7 minutes, but I need 7 hours. So I actually think that it's a very helpful injection into the conversation, even though, of course, we can go back to the Pilgrims and talk about the New Jerusalem, even though we can go to not just John Quincy Adams, as was mentioned, but George Washington at Newport and talking about how America is going to be a place which welcomes the Jews. And we can go to the First Amendment, we can go, and there are so many other pieces. But I think by adding the notion of Jacksonianism, we do two things. One is we show that it's an intersection of politics and religion. This is a place where, yes, politics and religion do reinforce one another. The high separation of church and state doesn't necessarily mean that you can never have your religious values infect and shape your political values. And now I'm talking about all these many liberals who often do that too. There was a phenomenon of rabbis for Obama. And I said, wait a minute, for years you've been saying keep religion out of politics. What's going on here? So we know that in the United States of America, because religion is so central to people's values and to people's identities, you're not going to keep it completely out. But of course, there are certain places where you need clear red lines. So bringing in Jacksonianism says, yes, there's a political dimension to this. It helps us get over the hump because populism and nationalism are considered to be problematic words. And by going to Andrew Jackson, who was, we know, a very problematic character, but had an understanding of American nationalism, of American exceptionalism, of American populism, we see a kind of fundamental building block, a foundation stone in understanding this exceptional relationship. So I really want to applaud Dov and Shlomo for bringing in Jacksonianism, and especially today, when so many things are fraught and everything is so politicized. To go back and find something that's very legitimate is very, very helpful. I think it's also helpful because it ties into one of the enduring tensions we're seeing in American politics and in this campaign, which is, and here I'm stealing from the great historian Christopher Lasch, who talked about the tension between progressives and populists. And when he talked about populists, he talked about it in the broadest ways. He talked about people who were more in tune with the rhythms of nature, more likely to be comfortable with God talk, more likely to be religious, and thus more willing to accept fate as it happened. And this, he said, even on the abortion debate, that if one gets pregnant, one takes it as a sign from God and one wasn't done to change it. I don't want to get into the rights and wrongs. I'm just trying to get into the ideology. Progressives, committed to science, committed to change, committed to conquering nature, have a different orientation. And whereas a healthy country needs to have both populists and progressives, and I would argue a healthy ideology needs to have both, sometimes in American politics, and this goes back to the 19th century and continues to play out in some ways into today's politics, you see that ongoing tension. Now, I think what this is most valuable, and again, I don't want to go into more detail because I want to respect time, where I think this is most valuable is understanding that the deep relationship between the United States of America and Israel, and between American Christians and American evangelicals and Israel, is not a passing thing. You know, everybody's so obsessed with the latest headline of the moment. I look at the polls. The Gallup polls show that 70 to 80% of Americans have been supporting Israel for the last 20, 30 years consistently. And let alone in this last crazy year, deep into May, June, July, the latest polls show that not only do 80% of Americans support Israel over Hamas, but the Harvard-Harris poll showed that 69% of Americans think that Israel is trying to minimize civilian casualties. And that goes against every article I've read and every tweet that I've seen in the New York Times and the Washington Post, et cetera, et cetera. And so I basically trust the decency of the American people. Let me end with three other thoughts. One, I want to go back to your comment, Reverend Parsons, about whether young evangelicals will come home. Because I think that is a central question also when we look at American support for Israel and American Jewish support for Israel over the last 76 years. And today, you know, I come by this naturally, but if I didn't, you know, we've been pulling our hair out over the young Jews who were dissenting from us for so long. And I remember 20, 30 years ago, people were worrying about the young Jews who were dissenting from Israel. And at the time they said, well, older Jews, they're closer to the Holocaust. They're closer to the foundation of the state of Israel. They understand. Now, it's very possible that we've had some kind of generational shift. But it's also possible, as you're suggesting, that maybe it's chronological, that maybe there's something about supporting Israel, maybe there's something about supporting the Palestinians, the way the causes are framed, that appeals more to 20-year-olds at one level and 50-year-olds to another level. And that's worth thinking about, because I too, like everyone else on the call so far, is optimistic. I want to end, though, by throwing out three constructive ideas building off the report, but also going in different directions. One, a phrase that I felt was missing from the report, and I'm sorry I missed it in my first read through, is the phrase promised land. I think the more we go back to the promised land, the more we go back to the sense of America as the promised land and Israel as the promised land, the more we go back to Americanism and Zionism as not just being entry points into the unique club in the world of democracies, but even the more unique club of democracies that see their land as promised and also see their mission as ideological, idea-based. The more we can get what I was saying earlier at the beginning, that sense of being intertwined as Jews and as Americans, as Israelis, in a common cause, in a common sense of mission. And by the way, I've seen that when we've hosted, and this is Reverend Kitchen, this goes a little bit to some of the questions that were asked to you, that when we've hosted evangelicals around our table, and we've hosted young African Americans and Latinos from the left around our table, and we've hosted Jews and millennials who are less religious around our table, my kids find that we have more in common with the first two groups than the third group. And when we talk about Israel as a custodian of the promised land, as a custodian of Christian sites, given that they've walked the land, they have an appreciation of that. More so around the Shabbat table, around the Sabbath table, when we talk about things like tradition, family, God, prayer, when we lay hands on our children, as we do not as show, but that's what we do every Friday when we bless our kids. I see, not just among the evangelical groups that we've had, but we've seen it again and again with young, liberal African Americans and Latinos, that they speak that language in a way that many blue state Americans and blue state Jews don't. And these are people who are from blue state, right? But I'm saying blue state whites and blue state. Now I'm exaggerating a little bit. I'm stereotyping a little bit, but I have to say that I think that that actually could be another way of thinking about it, that there is a certain openness to religion, openness to tradition, openness to family in certain cultural groups in the United States of America. And I think Hispanics and African Americans fit into that go way beyond whether you're showing up at church on Sunday morning. And when they come to our house and they see our kids both serving in the army and serving our God in our way with our traditions, it actually resonates with them and kind of gets them a little bit nostalgic of America they really want to see and America they really want to make. And so I think we have to have more faith, I agree, in the younger generation and in figuring out how to move forward with them to reach the promised land.
Hey, thank you, Professor Troy. I'd like to follow with Rabbi Wernick's appreciation of Gil's reminiscence about his Shabbat dinner, whether he sees trends between evangelicals in the United States and North American Jews in similar terms, and also whether you might be able to address the tensions that Professor Troy had laid out between populists and progressives, and whether that is part of the dynamic today. And how you see it affecting your own interreligious work.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everyone for being on this panel. It's really quite an honor. Thank you to the JPPI for this work. I just want to say, Gil, I have yet to be invited to your Shabbat table, and so I look forward to next time I'm in Israel having that opportunity. So I can talk
you're
more.
all invited. It's a general invitation.
So I'm going to have a better opportunity to answer Sarah's question more directly. I was struck by some of the similarities, which I know that probably all of us have been reading the metadata about religion in North America in general, and how over the last several decades, the fastest growing group of religious people are the nuns, N-O-N-E-S, as opposed to the Catholic nuns. And that you see it even in this data about the evangelicals, that the line on the graph that Dov and Shlomo showed of the fastest growing group were those that are really unaffiliated, especially among white evangelicals. And I think that certainly matches my experience when I was from 2009 to 2019, the head of United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, which is the network of conservative synagogues within North America. You look at the Pew studies and other studies, and the fastest growing group of Jews are those that are just Jewish, no religion. And I think there's also a correlation between levels of religiosity and support for Israel. I think that matches both the data as well as my own experience. And I think that one of the reasons that certainly from a religious perspective, Israel, the promised land for those of Christianity, Judaism, and even Islam, where the Hebrew Bible is the basis of the religious traditions that have emanated from it. Israel is central to that story. And if you see yourself in that story, it's only logical that you would see Israel as playing a central role for this. It's one of the challenges that I have in trying to understand anti-Zionist Jews, for example. It's like, which direction are you facing? Do you not say L'Shana Haba'ah next year in Jerusalem at the end of Yom Kippur or at the end of the Passover Seder? what happens in our prayers to Bonei Yerushalayim, to the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So I think it makes a lot of sense that the greater the religious engagement, the greater the story of Israel, both as a religious, social, cultural locus of our experience, and as well as the modern state of Israel and modern Zionism flows out of that ancient Zionism of the longing for the return to Zion. And so part of the challenge, certainly among the Jews, and I think we see that in the evangelical community as well, is to what extent is this trend gaining steam, and to what extent do we have the ability to address it and to soften it in any way, shape, or form in order to address a lot of these issues. I also think that one of the challenges, I think, Dov asked me this question in his presentation, why liberal Jews don't reach out more to evangelicals. And I have at least two responses to that question. The first is reading this report enlightened me in exposing how little I actually know about evangelicals, and how much of what I thought I knew was based on certain assumptions, especially on the more Jacksonian or literalist approach. And I think part of the reason why Jews don't reach out more to evangelicals is because they just don't know that much about them, actually. And whatever information that they have from the same insufficient news sources that perhaps people have about Israel and everything else in our world today. And so I really appreciated this report in the education that it gave me, and in the inspiration to want to actually find out more and learn more about it. The second reason why I think liberal Jews don't reach out to evangelicals is that there's a hesitancy that borders on fear, which has been mentioned, at least referenced to a little bit in the course of our conversation, that so much of the Jewish community, even those that might identify with more of the progressive or centrist denominations of Judaism, are really more secularists in their positioning of religious life, where they consider themselves cultural Jews rather than religious Jews, and they're not really in tune with any intent piety of their own people, and so there's a fear of that religious fervor that goes forward. And then the last thing that I want to say, at least at this juncture, I mean, there's a lot I think that could be said here. Actually, two things that I want to say in closing. The first is, I believe very, very strongly that support for Israel, as well as, quite frankly, in a world in which anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are merging together, I believe very, very strongly that Israel and the Jewish people are best served by bipartisan, multi-partisan cultural approaches to building bridges and relationships. I think it's very, very dangerous for Israel and the Jewish people to put all of our eggs in one basket. And I think that building bridges, therefore, is very important. One of the challenges I think the Jews have with that is that many, certainly in the progressive world, have felt that they have built those bridges over issues of race and police reform, mental health, homelessness, poverty, and other areas, LGBTQ, the queer community, and so forth. And with this round of the Israel-Hamas-Iran war, those allies have abandoned them. And so the the importance of building bridges, I think, still remains, but how to do so in such a way that when conflict arises, there's not that sense of abandonment, but there's actually a sense of still being able to sit down at the table and talk to each other. I know that I'm now in Canada. I've been in Canada for the last 5 years. And prior to my arrival, there was a very, very active neighborhood interfaith group in which synagogues and churches and 2 mosques sat together on a regular basis. That disappeared or ended just upon my arrival. I don't know, maybe it had something to do with me, but that was a joke. But it ended on my arrival, and it was certainly concluded by the time of COVID. And then in a post-COVID world, everybody's still trying to get out of COVID and was dealing with the crisis of COVID. It just never restarted again. And then when this war started, one of the most pervasive feelings that the Jewish community felt was that feeling of abandonment. Nobody called, except for 2 evangelical leaders within the greater Toronto area. And as a result of that call, as a result of them reaching out to me to see how I and my congregation is doing, we've developed a personal friendship, and our communities are now doing activities together. And what I find interesting is that one of them is more of a Jacksonian in terms of his evangelical background and church, and the other is more of the liberal Protestant on the other side. So I'm experiencing both at this moment. And I understand that a little bit more now, having read this report, than I did before in building that relationship with them. And then the final thing that I will say is, I think that in the recommendations, and I think I understand why, but I want to point it out, one of the other things that was missing was the importance of some sort of vision for the future vis-a-vis Israel and the Palestinians. I know that at this moment, for Israelis, certainly a 2-state solution seems like gobbledygook. How can you even talk about that when Israel suffered such a tragedy and is fighting a war on all the different fronts that it's doing? But yet, when the war ends, the Palestinians are still going to be there. And I think part of the problem that young people, especially, whether they're religious or not, in North America have, is that, the last 20 years has been 20 years of status quo, and no real work on either side to create a vision for what the future is going to be. And I think that there's no amount of hasbara, of PR or relationship building that we or anyone else can do without some Israeli leadership at some point in time, hopefully in the near future rather than the distant future, that starts creating, at least for Israel, what is a potentially viable future for how Israel and the Palestinians are able to envision their legitimate aspirations and needs. And I just think that's something that we need to call out and to recognize. Though Israel is fighting a just war, and I believe doing so in just ways, the cost of all wars is innocent people get caught up in it. And that's something, as a religious person, I think is something that has to be on the table if there's any possibility of a lasting future for Israelis and for Jews. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Wernick, and thank you to all the members of our panel for your insights on this report. You've certainly added depth and breadth to our understanding. Shlomo, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I don't know if we have time for questions. We're running a bit over time here today, but if we have a few moments, Shlomo, were there any questions from the audience?
I see certain things in the chat, not so much questions as statements. 3 new messages. 1 second. Let me see what I see here. I think that some of the statements are interesting, and they were addressed, I think, to host some panelists. So I suggest that people look at them. If anybody, I think that we are running late, and I want to thank everybody personally. I was involved very much in contacting people, and I really appreciate your participation. And I thought that this was a terrific panel and this was a terrific session. I want to thank Sarah for modeling a really good job, a really professional job of moderating and leading this thing on very short notice, if I may say so, Sarah. So on behalf of Dov and myself and JPPI, I want to thank all of you for a really useful and very, very penetrating discussion, and very useful comments about our report. So thank you very much. Dov, you want to add anything?
I will just to say that it has to be continued. I mean, I would like very much to continue, especially Rabbi Steve Vernick and Akaya and David. Thanks, Gil, Shlomo, and Sarah. I meet every Tuesday when we are in Israel at the JPPI, so it's easy. But with you, I think it's a relation we have to continue. It's something we have to continue and to think again, maybe also to make a following a next step about what could be done and how we can make it to concrete thing, and to add also what Rabbi Steve Vernick spoke about the horizon of a peace and Palestinian thing, which is very important to give the people not only a situation but also some horizon and hope for the future where we want to achieve. And thank you very much. Thank you very much. I know it's not easy. A lot of people feel that it's not the time just to be connected to Israel, not the time to be connected to a think tank in Jerusalem. It's not easy. There is maybe pressure from the field, people telling you how you can act with these people and so on. But it's important during the war, when we have a fighting all the battlefronts, also to have this, to beat these new coalitions. We have to be new creative to have you very quick. Thank you very much and goodbye. See you.
Thank you to everyone participating today, and thank you to our panelists, and of course, thank you to our authors. We look forward to you joining us here in Jerusalem again soon.